The year is 1066. In January, the King of England, Edward the Confessor, dies without a clear heir, plunging the kingdom into a crisis that will change its destiny forever. Within months, three of Europe's most powerful men would lay claim to the crown, and the fate of England would be decided not in a palace, but on a bloody hillside in Sussex. This is the story of a year of three kings, of two invasions, and of a single brutal, day-long battle that would bring an end to the Anglo-Saxon age and give birth to the nation we know as England. This is the Battle of Hastings. The three claimants were a study in contrast. First, there was Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, a respected Anglo-Saxon leader who was on the scene and who had himself crowned king almost immediately. Second, there was William, Duke of Normandy. A tough, ruthless, and cunning warrior, William claimed that King Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, and that Harold Godwinson had sworn a sacred oath to support his claim. When Harold took the crown, William saw it as a declaration of war and began building a massive invasion fleet, securing the Pope's blessing for his holy crusade. And third, in the north, there was Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler of Norway, a legendary Viking warrior who believed he had a claim to the throne through an old pact. In the late summer of 1066, the invasion winds blew first from the north. Harald Hardrada landed in northern England, and Harold Godwinson had to react. In a stunning display of leadership, King Harold marched his elite army, the Huscarls, on an incredible forced march, covering nearly 200 miles in less than a week. On September 25th, he completely surprised the Viking army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and annihilated it. Killing Hardrada in the process, he had secured his kingdom. Or so he thought. Just 3 days later, while Harold's army was still in the north, recovering from that brutal battle, the winds in the English Channel finally turned. William of Normandy landed his own massive army at Pevensey on the southern coast. He was unopposed. When the news reached King Harold, he was faced with an impossible choice. His army was battered and exhausted, but he refused to wait. In another grueling forced march, he raced his men south, gathering a new, levied army of local militias, the Feigned, along the way. On the 13th of October, he arrived near Hastings and took up a formidable defensive position on a ridge known as Senlac Hill. On the morning of October 14, 1066, the two armies faced each other. The contrast was stark. Harold's Anglo-Saxon army was composed almost entirely of infantry. His best troops, the Huscarls, were heavily armored, axe-wielding warriors who, along with the Feigned, formed the core of his strategy, the shield wall. It was a near-impenetrable, interlocking line of shields and spears, a human fortress on top of a hill. William's Norman army, on the other hand, was a modern combined arms force. He had archers, infantry, and most importantly, a large contingent of armored shock cavalry, the Knights. The battle began around 9 a.m. with a blast of Norman trumpets. William sent his infantry and archers up the hill to soften the Saxon line, but the shield wall held firm. The Norman arrows were ineffective, bouncing off the shields, and the infantry was repulsed by a rain of rocks and javelins. William then ordered his knights to charge. This was the first time the Anglo-Saxons had faced a massed cavalry charge. The knights thundered up the hill, but they could not break the shield wall. The crashing of horses into the wall of wood and steel was terrifying, but the Saxons' long axes, which could famously cut a man and his horse in two, drove the knights back in disarray. In the chaos, a rumor swept the Norman ranks that Duke William had been killed. Panic set in, and his left flank, composed of Breton troops, broke and fled down the hill. This was the critical moment. Seeing the enemy run, a large group of Saxons, against Harold's direct orders, broke the discipline of the shield wall and charged down the hill in pursuit. But William was not dead. Riding into the fleeing mob and lifting his helmet to show his face, he rallied his men. He then turned his knights on the disorganized, exposed Saxons who had chased them, cutting them to pieces on the flat ground. William was a brilliant tactician, and he had learned a vital lesson. The Saxons were brave, but they were undisciplined. He now had his strategy. For the rest of the afternoon, William used a brutal, cynical tactic. He ordered his knights to charge the shield wall, and then immediately pretend to break and flee. Time and time again, the Saxons fell for the trap. Groups of them would charge down the hill, only to be surrounded and destroyed by the Norman cavalry. Each time this happened, the shield wall on Senlac Hill grew thinner and weaker. By late afternoon, the Anglo-Saxon army was a wreck, but as long as Harold Godwinson stood, they would not break. The two sides were exhausted. William, in a final desperate move, ordered his archers to do something new. Instead of firing at the shield wall, he told them to fire over it, to plunge their arrows down onto the heads of the men standing in the rear. It was this moment that became immortalized in legend and on the Bayeux tapestry. A stray arrow fired high into the air struck King Harold in the eye. He staggered, and as he tried to pull the shaft from his face, a group of Norman knights, seeing the king's banner falter, broke through the line. They cut him down where he stood. The death of Harold was the end. With their king gone, the shield wall finally broke. The Huscarls, in a final act of loyalty, made a suicidal last stand around their fallen king's banner. But they were overwhelmed. The Fyrd fled into the growing darkness, and the battle was over. William of Normandy had won the field, the battle, and the kingdom. On Christmas Day, 1066, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The Norman conquest had begun. The Anglo-Saxon age was over, and a new era of English history, language, culture, and architecture was born from the blood and sacrifice on that single decisive day.